My name is Elena Marsh. I am 34 years old. 6 hours before my brother stood up at my wedding reception and called me a family fraud in front of 200 guests, I was standing in a hotel bathroom fixing my veil and telling myself, this day would be different. That for one night my family would just let me have something good without turning it into a performance about them. I was wrong. Derek waited until the toast, until the room had a microphone in his hand and every phone in the venue was already recording for the group chat, and he said it clean and calm, like he had practiced it. He said, "Everyone loves the success story, but somebody should ask where the money actually came from." My new husband's hand tightened around mine under the table. My mother's face went white, and I just stood there in my dress, smiling, because I already knew something Derek didn't know. I knew. I had known it for 6 weeks. There was a folder sitting in my lawyer's office with his name on it, and a phone call already scheduled for 8 the next morning that was going to end with his enrollment canceled and his name removed from something he was never supposed to have touched. But you don't need to know all that yet. Before I tell you what happened the next morning and why he left that program with nothing, tell me what time it is right now where you're watching this from and where in the world you're sitting. Type it below. I read every single one. The band kept playing behind me. I could hear the clink of forks against plates starting up again, the low murmur of 200 people deciding whether to pretend nothing had happened. I sat back down, smoothed my dress, and reached for my water glass, with a hand that did not shake, and I remember thinking, very clearly, so this is what it feels like when years of practice finally pay off. Not rage, just steadiness. To understand why I wasn't surprised, you have to go back further than the wedding. You have to go back to a kitchen table when I was 9 and Derek was 6. Our father had just left for the second time, and our mother sat us both down and told us that from now on, family takes care of family, no questions asked. I didn't know yet that in our house, that sentence only ever pointed one direction. It pointed at me. When I was 14, I won a small regional writing prize, $40 and a certificate. Derek cried because he hadn't won anything that year, and my mother told me to give him half the money so he wouldn't feel bad. I did. I remember standing in my room afterward, holding $20, feeling like I had done something wrong by winning in the first place. When I was 22, fresh out of college with my first real paycheck, Derek called me crying about a car. Repossession. I wired him $600 I didn't have to spare. My mother called it being a good sister. Nobody ever called it what it actually was, which was training. Training me to flinch, to apologize for having more, to hand things over before anyone even had to ask twice. At 16, I got my first part-time job at a bookstore downtown, folding sweaters and shelving paperbacks for $6 an hour. I saved almost every cent of it in a shoebox under my bed because I had started to notice that money in my hands never quite stayed in my hands. That Christmas, my mother found the shoebox while looking for wrapping paper and told me gently that it wouldn't kill me to help Derek get the sneakers he'd been asking for, since I clearly had more saved than I needed. I remember standing in the doorway of my room watching her count out $60 from my shoebox onto my bedspread, and I remember not saying anything at all because by then silence already felt safer than asking why the math always worked out the same way. At 19, during my second semester of college, Derek called me at midnight saying he'd been in a fight, that he needed a ride home from a town 2 hours away, that he couldn't call our mother because she'd be furious. I drove through the night on a school night, picked him up smelling like beer and blood from a split lip, and drove him home while he slept in the passenger seat like a child. I never told anyone I missed an exam the next morning because of it. I never told anyone how many times that particular pattern repeated over the years that followed. A phone call, an emergency, a version of me quietly rearranging my life to absorb whatever mess had landed on him that week. By 26, I had built a small accounting and financial consulting practice from nothing, working nights and weekends while Derek moved between jobs he always described as almost working out. Every family holiday came with the same quiet expectation. Elena will cover it. Elena always covers it. I want to be honest about something. For most of those years, I didn't think of it as unfair. I thought of it as love. I thought that was simply what a good daughter, a good sister, was supposed to do: absorb, adjust, give without counting. It took me a long time to understand that love without any boundary at all isn't really love. It's just an open account that someone else keeps making withdrawals from, and you're the only one who never gets to see the balance. The moment I decided, no more came 3 years ago at our father's funeral, of all places. Derek stood up and told relatives I barely knew that he was the one holding the family together, that I was too busy with my business to really be present. I remember standing at the back of that room in my black dress, and something in me went very quiet and very still. I wasn't angry. I was done. Done performing gratitude for a role I never agreed to play. That was the day I stopped explaining myself to people who had already decided who I was. So when our parents' small education trust, the one our late father set up specifically to help either of us finish school or certifications, came under my control as trustee 2 years ago, I didn't hand Derek open access the way he expected. I told him the same thing I told myself for the first time in my life. Every disbursement needs a request, a receipt, and my signature. Not because I didn't trust him as a brother, because I finally trusted myself enough to have a boundary. He was furious. He called it controlling. He called it me finally showing my true colors. I let him be angry. I did not let him have the account. That conversation happened over the phone, and I remember pacing my apartment kitchen while he spoke, the cold tile under my bare feet, the hum of the refrigerator behind, me the only steady thing in the room. He told me our father would be disappointed in how I was treating my own brother. I told him our father put a signature requirement in that trust document himself, on paper, before he died, and that if he wanted to be angry at someone for the rules, he should be angry at a dead man's handwriting, not at me. He hung up on me. We didn't speak for almost 3 weeks after that, which at the time felt like the longest silence of my life. Looking back now, it was the first real quiet I'd had in that relationship in over 2 decades, and some small, guilty part of me had almost enjoyed it. 6 weeks before my wedding, I got a notification from the bank that manages the trust. A disbursement request had been submitted and approved for an executive certification program, $11,400, listed as authorized by trustee signature. My signature. Except I had never seen the request. I had never signed anything that month. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, feeling the exact same cold 9-year-old stillness I felt at that funeral. Somebody had forged my name to move money out of a trust our dead father built for both of his children to actually better themselves, not to be stolen from. I did not call Derek. I did not scream into the phone or drive to his apartment. I have learned, slowly and expensively, that emotion is exactly what people like Derek are counting on. Emotion gets messy, and messy is where forgeries and family favors get quietly buried under an apology dinner. So instead, I opened a blank document on my laptop and typed one line at the top: timeline of events. That single sentence became the most useful thing I did all year. I sat there for a long moment before typing anything else, listening to the tick of the wall clock in my kitchen, feeling something settle in my chest that I can only describe as clarity. Not the sharp, hot clarity of anger. Something colder and steadier, the kind of clarity you feel when you finally stop asking whether something is really happening and start asking what you're going to do about it now that it is. I made a cup of tea I never drank. I sat back down at that laptop at 11 at night in my work clothes, still in the blazer I'd worn to a client meeting that morning, and I began building the file that would eventually sit on Priya's desk. requested the original disbursement form from the bank in writing, not by phone, so there would be a paper trail of my request as well. When it arrived, I compared the signature against 3 notarized documents I had signed the same month, side by side under good light, photographing every page. The forgery was close. It was not perfect. The pressure on the E was wrong, too heavy, the kind of heavy hand Derek has always had since he was a teenager, copying my signature on permission slips he didn't want Mom to see. I called the program's admissions office directly, identifying myself only as the account holder listed on the payment, asking to confirm enrollment dates and the name of the enrolled student. They confirmed it within minutes. Derek Marsh. Cohort starting in 5 weeks. Payment received in full, listed as a family sponsorship from the Marsh Family Education Trust. I pulled the trust's full transaction history for the past year, not just the one disbursement. I found 2 more. Small enough that I hadn't flagged them before. $400 here, $700 there. Each one dated on days I now cross, referenced against my calendar. On every single date, I'd been traveling for work in a different time zone, unreachable by design because Derek knew my schedule. He had studied my absence the way you'd study a lock before deciding when to pick it. I printed every one of those statements and laid them across my dining table one Sunday afternoon, alongside a printed calendar of my own travel for the year, color-coding each date in yellow highlighter where the 2 overlapped. By the time I was finished, the pattern wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was a visible shape on paper, 3 separate withdrawals, 3 separate dates, each one landing within 48 hours of a trip I had posted about publicly, tagged locations and all, on the same social media account Derek followed. I remember standing over that table for a long time, looking down at the highlighted rows, feeling less like a sister piecing together a betrayal and more like an auditor closing a case, which, in a strange way, was exactly the version of myself I needed to be for the next 6 weeks. I did not confront him yet. I hired an attorney who specializes in trust and fiduciary matters, a calm, exact woman named Priya, who has built her entire career on not raising her voice. Her office smelled like old paper and citrus hand soap, and there was a small potted plant on the corner of her desk that I found myself staring at while she read through my folder the first time, because it was easier than watching her face for a reaction. I brought her everything: the timeline, the signature comparisons, the bank confirmations, the transaction history, the admissions office call notes with names and times. She read through it once, looked up, and said 4 words that stuck with me. "This is very clean," Priya explained, in the flat, practical tone of someone who has seen this exact family pattern more times than she could count. That the biggest mistake people make in situations like mine is confronting the person before the paperwork is airtight, because it gives them time to either destroy evidence or, worse, flip the narrative before institutions ever get involved. She told me the goal wasn't to catch Derek in a lie in front of our mother. The goal was to make it structurally impossible for anyone, including our mother, to argue with what had happened. Documents don't have feelings to appeal to. That was the exact sentence she used, and I wrote it down on a sticky note and kept it on my monitor for the rest of those 6 weeks. Clean, because I hadn't touched a single piece of it with anger. I had touched it with documentation. Priya drafted a formal notice to the certification program's compliance office, not accusing anyone publicly, simply stating that the listed sponsoring party had not authorized the enrollment payment and requesting the program place a hold on the account pending verification. We sent copies to the bank's fraud department at the same time, with the forged signature comparison attached. 2 institutions, 2 separate paper trails, both moving quietly in the background while my life outside that folder looked completely normal. And it needed to look normal, because I still had a wedding to plan. That was the strange part of those 6 weeks. In the daytime, I was choosing centerpieces and tasting cake and hugging my mother while she cried happy tears about her daughter finally settling down. In the evenings, I was on the phone with Priya, refining a timeline, confirming that the compliance office had received our documents, learning that most institutions take fraud claims seriously the moment the paperwork is airtight and unemotional. Nobody yelling, nobody guessing. Just dates, numbers, and names, all lined up like dominoes waiting for one calm hand to tip them. Derek, of course, knew none of this. He kept calling to talk about the wedding, kept dropping little comments about how excited he was for his program, how it was finally going to be his year, how people were finally going to take him seriously. I let him talk. I said congratulations. I have gotten very good at holding a completely calm voice over a phone while reading a fraud investigation update on my other screen. 3 days before the wedding, the bank's fraud department called to confirm they had opened a formal case and flagged the account for review, effective immediately, though disbursements already sent were still being traced. The program's compliance office followed up separately, stating they would require sponsor identity verification before the cohort's start date, which happened to fall the week after my wedding. Priya and I agreed on the timing without either of us saying it out loud. We would let the wedding happen. Then, we would let the truth happen. I remember that phone call from the bank very specifically because I took it in my car in a parking lot outside the florist's shop, engine off, both hands on the steering wheel even though I wasn't driving, just needing something solid to hold on to while a stranger read me confirmation numbers about my own brother's forged handwriting. When I hung up, I sat there for a full minute before going inside to approve centerpiece arrangements, and then I walked in and smiled at the florist and picked white ranunculus over peonies like nothing in the world was wrong, because in that moment for my own sanity, nothing needed to be wrong yet. The wedding still deserved to be mine, untouched by him, for at least a few more days. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from living 2 lives in the same week, the bride picking out shoes and the trustee building a fraud file. And I don't think I fully understood how much it cost me until the morning of the wedding itself, when I woke up at 5 and lay in bed staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, running the timeline through my head one more time out of habit, before finally telling myself gently that today the folder could wait. Today I was allowed to just be a woman getting married. I did not expect Derek to hand me the final piece of evidence himself, in front of 200 people, with a microphone in his hand. The reception was in a restored barn with string lights, strung across old wooden beams, the kind of venue that smells like cedar and candle wax and cut flowers. I remember the exact texture of the tablecloth under my fingers when Derek stood up during toasts, uninvited, and took the microphone from my maid of honor with a smile that our mother would later call charming, and I would call rehearsed. He talked about our childhood for a minute, warm enough that people laughed. Then his voice shifted, just slightly, into something colder underneath the smile. He said that success stories always look clean from the outside. He said maybe it was time somebody in this family said the quiet part out loud. He looked directly at me and said, "Everyone loves the success story, but somebody should ask where the money actually came from. Family fraud runs in interesting directions sometimes." The room went silent in that specific way. A room goes silent when 200 people simultaneously decide not to breathe. Somewhere near the back, a fork clinked against a plate, and the sound felt enormous. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. An aunt I hadn't seen in years leaned toward her husband and whispered something behind a napkin. My new husband, Marcus, stood up beside me, jaw tight, but I put my hand on his arm just lightly because I did not need defending. I needed one more sentence from Derek, and he had just handed it to me on a microphone in front of every witness I would ever need. I felt the weight of the string lights above us, warm and gold against the dark wood beams, completely indifferent to what was happening underneath them. I felt the tight pull of my dress against my ribs as I breathed in slowly, once, the way you do when you want your voice to come out steady instead of shaking. I was aware, in a strange, almost floating way, of my own heartbeat, and of how calm it actually was, because I had spent 6 weeks preparing for a version of this moment without knowing exactly when or how it would arrive. It had simply arrived early and in public, and that was fine. I was ready either way. He had just publicly implied, unprompted in front of family, co-workers, and our own wedding photographer's rolling camera, that money had moved through the family in a direction that deserved scrutiny. He meant it as an Kai-D accusation against me. He didn't realize he had just narrated out loud the exact motive a compliance officer would later ask about in writing. I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I simply said, "Thank you for that, Derek. I actually have some paperwork I think you'll want to see tomorrow morning. Sit down and enjoy the cake." Then I turned to the room, smiled, and said the band could keep playing. People laughed uncertainly. The tension didn't fully break, but it bent, and that was enough. Later that night, after the last guests left and Marcus and I sat on the floor of our hotel suite, still in half our wedding clothes, my veil pinned crooked and forgotten in my hair, he asked me quietly if I was okay. I told him something I hadn't fully said out loud until that moment. I said, "I'm not devastated. I already knew what he was. Tonight, he just said it where everyone could hear it, and tomorrow morning, the people who actually matter are going to hear the rest." Marcus had known most of it already, the trust, the forged signature, the folder sitting on Priya's desk, because I don't believe in walking into a marriage with a locked drawer of secrets. But hearing Derek say it out loud, twisting the truth into an accusation against me at our own wedding, still landed on him differently than it landed on me. He asked if I wanted him to say something to Derek before we left for our honeymoon. I told him no. I told him the kindest thing either of us could do for Derek at that point was nothing at all, was simply letting the process that was already moving finish moving, without either of us adding a single unnecessary word to it. Marcus nodded slowly, then reached over and took the pins out of my hair one by one, and for a little while neither of us talked about my brother at all, which was exactly the wedding night I actually wanted. The next morning, at 8 o'clock exactly, my phone rang. It was the program's compliance director, following up on the verification request Priya had filed weeks earlier, now escalated by the forged signature confirmation the bank's fraud department had finalized 2 days before. I confirmed on record that I had never authorized the sponsorship, that the signature on file did not match my notarized documents, and that I was formally withdrawing the trust as a sponsoring party effective immediately. The compliance director thanked me for my cooperation and told me in the flat, procedural tone institutions use for exactly these situations that per their enrollment integrity policy, Derek Marsh's admission was being rescinded effective that day due to fraudulent sponsorship documentation, and that his seat in the cohort was void. I remember exactly where I was sitting when she said it, cross-legged on the hotel bed in a white robe with the room service tray still on the nightstand, a fork balanced on the edge of a half-eaten pancake, the morning light coming in soft and yellow through the curtains Marcus hadn't fully closed the night before. I said thank you for the update, and could I get written confirmation for my records? And she said of course, and that was it. No shouting, no confrontation. Just a woman doing her job on a Tuesday morning, closing a door that never should have been open in the first place, while I sat there in my honeymoon robe feeling something in my chest finally unclench after 6 weeks of holding it tight. I did not have to say a single unkind word to my brother. I did not have to raise my voice, or call him names or post anything online. I had simply told the truth, on time, with documents, to the people whose job it was to act on it. The consequence was entirely his own signature, forged in his own heavy hand, catching up to him on a Tuesday morning while I sat in a hotel robe eating room service pancakes with my husband of less than 24 hours. The family group chat, the same one that had gone quiet and awkward the night before after Derek's toast, exploded again by 9 that morning. But this time it was aimed at him. Someone had already gotten a screenshot of the compliance office's rescission notice from a mutual cousin who worked adjacent to the program, and it moved through the family faster than any wedding photo ever could. My mother texted first, just 3 words. "Derek, is this true?" He did not answer for 4 hours. When he finally did, it was a paragraph of half apologies and half justifications, the kind that admits nothing directly, but somehow still confirms everything. I did not respond in the chat. I let the documents speak, the way they had been speaking, for weeks already. Priya later told me that was the smartest thing I did in this entire situation, staying visibly calm and letting institutions do institutional things, while the emotional fallout happened entirely without my participation. Watched the messages come in throughout that day anyway. Sitting on a balcony overlooking the water on the first full day of my honeymoon, phone screen bright against the tropical afternoon glare. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in months suddenly had opinions. An uncle sent a single message that just said, "Well, that explains a lot, actually," referencing years of small, unexplained tensions nobody had ever put a name to before. My mother sent one more message after her first, this one longer, asking if I was all right, telling me she was sorry she hadn't asked sooner what all those years of covering for him had actually cost me. I read it twice, put the phone face down, on the table between us, and let myself just look at the ocean for a while instead. Some things don't need an immediate response. Some things just need to be allowed to land. 2 days after the wedding, Derek asked to meet in person, at our mother's house, with her present as what he called a mediator. I agreed, mostly because I wanted this closed cleanly, not left open as a wound the family could keep reopening every holiday for the next decade. We sat at the same kitchen table where, 25 years earlier, our mother had told a 9-year, "Old girl, that family takes care of family, no questions asked." This time I brought a folder, not to humiliate him, to end the guessing. I laid out copies, not originals, of the signature comparison, the transaction dates cross-referenced with my travel calendar, the admissions office confirmation, and the due compliance office's rescission letter. I did not raise my voice once. I said, "This isn't about the wedding toast, Derek. This is about 3 separate withdrawals from a trust our father built for both of us, using a signature that wasn't mine. On dates you knew I'd be unreachable. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern." He tried anger first, the same performance from the microphone, said I was making him look like a criminal in front of Mom. I said, "You made yourself look like whatever you looked like when you signed my name on a bank form." I just brought the paperwork. He tried tears next, said he was drowning, said he didn't know what else to do, said family was supposed to help. I said, "Family did help, for 25 years, until helping became something you took without asking. There's a difference between a sister who supports you and a sister you can forge." My mother, for the first time in my life, did not immediately move to comfort him or excuse it. She looked at the papers for a long time, especially the signature. Comparison, tracing the heavy pressure on the E with her finger, and she said quietly, "I taught her to always give you the benefit of the doubt. I didn't know I was teaching you that you'd never need to ask." The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, the same refrigerator that had been humming in that kitchen since I was a child. A small, steady sound that had witnessed every version of this family's arguments over the decades and never once taken a side. Derek's hands were flat on the table, fingers spread, and I noticed for the first time that they were shaking slightly, not from anger anymore, but from something closer to fear, the specific fear of a person watching consequences arrive that they had genuinely never believed would come. There was no scene after that. No slammed doors, no dramatic exit. Just a long, uncomfortable silence, and then Derek finally saying quietly that he understood the enrollment was gone, and that he wasn't going to fight the bank's findings because he knew he couldn't. He asked me near the end of that conversation, voice smaller than I had heard it in years, whether this meant we were done as siblings. I told him the truth, because I owed him that much even after everything. I said I didn't know yet. I said what I did know was that whatever relationship came next would have actual boundaries in it. Real ones. With consequences attached. Not just the word boundary used as something I apologized for having. He nodded slowly, and for the first time in that entire meeting, he didn't argue. The financial consequences did not end with the rescinded enrollment. The bank's fraud department, once their investigation formally closed, required repayment of all 3 fraudulent disbursements as a condition of not referring the case for prosecution, a total just over $12,000, now sitting as a documented debt against him rather than a quiet family favor nobody tracked. His employer at the time, upon learning through an unrelated background re-verification that a financial fraud case had been opened under his name, quietly did not renew his contract at its scheduled review, citing unrelated performance concerns. That suddenly stopped being generous once his file had a flag on it. None of that was engineered by me. It was simply what happens when forged paperwork stops being a family secret and becomes a documented fact in 2 separate institutional systems. People sometimes ask me, when I tell parts of this story, whether I feel guilty, whether ruining my brother's chance at a program mattered more than keeping peace at my own wedding. I understand the question, but it misunderstands what actually happened. I did not ruin anything. I revoked access to something that was never his to take, using exactly the same rules that would have applied to any stranger who forged a financial document. The only thing that collapsed was the version of him that required my silence to survive. Since then, the house feels different, and I don't mean my house, I mean the family, the whole shape of it. The trust now requires dual verification and a notarized signature for every disbursement, a small procedural change that quietly closes the exact door Derek used to walk through. I no longer get calls asking me to cover things without explanation. I no longer flinch when my phone rings and his name comes up, because whatever this next chapter with him looks like, it will happen on terms that are actually mine, not terms, shaped by 25 years of quietly absorbing whatever the family needed absorbed. Marcus and I have been married almost a year now, and I still remember the exact moment on our honeymoon when I finally stopped checking my phone for updates from Priya, sitting on that same balcony a few days later, watching the sun go down over water so calm it barely made a sound against the shore. I remember thinking, this is what it feels like to have nothing left to manage. No pending case, no forged signature waiting to be explained away, no quiet dread sitting under every family phone call. Just the ocean, and my husband's hand in mine, and a version of peace I hadn't fully believed I was allowed to have. Derek and I do talk now, occasionally, mostly around holidays. And it is different in ways that are hard to explain to people who haven't lived through something like this themselves. There is no performance anymore, no microphone speeches, no sudden emergencies that require me to rearrange my life on short notice. He paid back the first installment of the fraudulent disbursements on schedule through a formal repayment plan. The bank set up, and I know because I get a quiet notification each quarter. A small, unremarkable line item that means more to me than any apology he's given in person. An apology is words. A repayment plan is proof. My mother has changed too, in smaller, slower ways. She still loves him the way mothers love their children, without condition, and I don't begrudge her that anymore the way I might have a few years ago. But she has stopped asking me to smooth things over for him. She has stopped saying the word family the way she used to say it, like it was a debt only I was ever expected to pay. Last Thanksgiving, when Derek made a small joke at the table about my accounting practice being useful for keeping receipts on everyone, the room laughed, gently. And I laughed too, because it had finally become something we could actually joke about instead of something that quietly ran our whole family from underneath the surface. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters more than the drama of the wedding toast or the satisfaction of the morning after. This was never revenge. Revenge would have been standing up at that reception and reading his forgery out loud to 200 guests, humiliating him in the same room he tried to humiliate me in. I could have done that. Part of me, in the first hot second after he handed back that microphone, wanted exactly that. Wanted to watch his face change in front of everyone the way mine had changed watching that bank notification alone in my kitchen weeks earlier. I didn't do that. I waited. I let institutions with no emotional stake in our family history look at facts and make their own determination. What happened to Derek happened because of Derek's own signature, on Derek's own forms, on dates Derek chose. I simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own choices, which is a very different thing from creating consequences out of nowhere. There is a difference, I think, between wanting someone to hurt and wanting someone to finally be held accountable. And for a long time, I didn't fully understand that those were two separate feelings. Revenge wants an audience and a wound. Boundaries want a process and a record. I chose the record. I chose signatures and timelines and phone calls to compliance offices instead of a single satisfying sentence shouted across a barn full of string lights. And I will tell you honestly, the second option would have felt good for about 10 minutes. The first option is the reason I can still look at myself in a mirror a year later and feel nothing but steady. Self-respect doesn't need an audience. Revenge does. I never needed anyone to watch me win because I was never trying to win. I was only trying to stop losing quietly. So here is what I actually want to ask you, now that you know the whole story. Where is the line, for you, between being a good family member and being someone else's convenient answer to their own problems? Have you ever had to build a boundary out of paperwork instead of a phone call because words alone stopped being enough? Tell me in the comments, because I read every single one, and some of the most honest stories in this comment section come from people who never thought their situation was dramatic enough to share. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think about a boundary you've been putting off, hit that like button, subscribe for more real family stories like this one, and drop a comment letting me know what part hit hardest. I'll see you in the next one. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and reflection purposes. Any resemblance to real persons, events, or specific institutions is purely coincidental.